So, welcome to this network-centric resources online discussion. Today, we are talking about indicators for success. Um, as mentioned, I've mentioned many times before on this call, network-centric resources are super hard and take an incredibly long time to develop and get right. Um, as we are building knowledge assets for communities and networks to use, it's difficult to measure success, particularly if we are evaluating based on how we are sharing ownership, how we are enabling contributions, and supporting collaboration. So what we want to do during this online discussion is demystify that. So just to say, I've got three wonderful people who have agreed to do the small group breakouts. We are not doing this under the guise of anybody knowing more than anyone else on this call. So I am grateful that Ashley, Liz, and Liz have agreed to do the small group breakups and help surface the knowledge and the experience that is here on this online discussion. So what's just going to happen in a few minutes is I'm going to throw you into small group breakouts. When you get there, please, you're going to have a quick go round of doing introductions. Please keep those brief, because I think what I'm going to do is give you all a good 15 to 20 minutes in your small groups to hash this out. But hello, welcome back. I hope those were good and productive sessions. I have to say, I'm overjoyed to see all the notes that were being taken in that. So grateful to those people that did take notes in the thing, because it's going to be super helpful. I can see a lot of really good stuff there. Speaking of notes, one thing I've learned is I am bad at taking notes when I run these sessions. So I'm just wondering if somebody would volunteer to take notes during this large group discussion.
I can continue taking notes.
Mary, thank you so much. You rock. Really appreciate that. So just general, like what I'd love to get is just your takeaways from the discussion. Like what was the sort of top level, your ahas, things that you hadn't realized, things that were said that made you think differently about the topic. And just to note, you are all on mute, so you have to come off mute if you want to say anything.
Mine is so high. Oh,
go ahead, Neil.
High level, Dirk. I often kind of end up in this place of gratitude and awe at the evolution of the work that's being done and the folks who are engaging in it. So just hats off to Mary and to Liz, who were in my group. Ashley, I beg your pardon. Anyway, that's just my very high level appreciation and acknowledgement of kind of how this conversation is maturing, and yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Great. I am gonna. So let me slightly rephrase the question in terms of what I'd like to hear in the takeaways. If we were compiling a list of indicators for success for our resources, what would you say needs to be on it? So based on the conversations, what would you say? Liz, please.
So I volunteered to represent our group, and we had a couple of things that came up across a bunch of our report outs to each other. So I think the indicators for success that rose to the top that everybody essentially mentioned were, there are some like clear digital indicators around kind of unique page views, click-throughs, downloads of certain resources. And then there is also a survey function that folks have used to figure out if their resources are effective. So pre and post surveys around kind of learning curve, and then also kind of experience-based surveys. And then a question, which I'd love to pose to other people because it came up in our space, around how you track kind of the health of a resource beyond digital indicators. I think we all have had anecdotal kind of cold calls back to us about whether or not a resource was useful, or finding out, like, for example, for me, I found out a group in Alaska was using a bunch of resources that they had gotten in real life at a training and then taken and started to use. So there were some questions around how do we get people to engage with the digital indicators that we've offered folks, and then a question around how do you track kind of organic spread of a resource.
Cool, very cool. Any other from that group want to add in? Hillary, no wait, sorry, I'm getting your things totally. No wait, Hillary and I'm not going to say Albacazar and Bruce, which I'm sure is totally wrong. I should probably look at the notes.
and Lorna, Adriana and Lorna.
Adriana and Lorna. Any other things to add to what Liz has said in terms of what you would add to a list of indicators for success? Nope. Okay, well, thanks for doing that report back, Liz. Let's move on to, let's do the other Liz Monk. In your group, what have you guys come up with in terms of what would be indicators of success? Oh, you're on mute.
I'm having a few connection issues. But we talked a lot about that qualitative versus quantitative, and how you can measure things that are really difficult, those small things. So I don't know, maybe Greg, do you want to jump in and talk about your challenge?
Well, I'm dealing with the things that are easiest for me to measure are the least valuable value propositions in my initiative. And the fact that they're easier to measure, is a strong incentive for me to be talking about them, and that ends up warping the sort of mission. And that's true for me. And I also, on a second order, I think it's very much true for the partners of mine in my community who are under a lot of pressure to do things like data-driven decision-making in ways that may end up prioritizing things that are linear and easily quantifiable over other things that are not quantifiable but still valuable. And so I struggle with this, Dirk. I know we've talked about it before. So I was a little bit like,
I was just gonna say amen, but yes, that is a common one. What else from your guys' group? Chad, Susie, Liz?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that, again, I think Greg and I went off on a similar tangent around sort of data-driven versus anecdotal evidence of what's working. And we just tend to rely a lot on sort of what our volunteers tell us, what the nonprofits we work with tell us they find useful. So it's very sort of small scale and personal at the moment. Like, I don't think we're really focusing on indicators, but I guess my takeaway from this call is maybe that's not a terrible thing. Maybe that's okay, which is nice.
Right, but I think the struggle still is how do you measure it in a meaningful way, right? So, because I think it's the problem with, one, we need to know that what we're doing is actually having impact, right? We need that. We need to understand how it's impactful, so that if we're working on something, we need to make sure that it is actually valuable. We need to understand. So these points in terms of and Greg's point very much, like the things that we can actually tell quite easily, give us the least amount of information in terms of how do we actually make our resource more valuable than what it is. All it does is it just tells us a number, right? So, I think that's the thing that we are trying to crack, is how do we get beyond that? So in terms of anyone else in your group, Chad or Liz, if you had anything more in terms of that regard.
As you might well imagine, Dirk, I mostly wondered out loud about how do you develop lead indicators for stuff that happens after the thing that it seems like you would be measuring, in this case, MozFest. Like, how do you have lead indicators for what happens as a result of MozFest, rather than lead indicators necessarily for the festival itself, which I think we have a good handle on, or like lagging indicators, which I think we can also all imagine how you might come back much later to see what people have done. But how do you design things to like get ahead of what's happening after a big thing?
Yeah.
Chad,
and go ahead, Greg.
Well, I liked one thing Chad said about assessing the rate by which participants in one MozFest program cross over to one Mozilla program cross over to another. So like that was interesting, because it's like it's a metric of how complex the interconnections are within this community, to see if people participate in one thing, are they now later participating in other things too, which is pretty interesting to me.
And something that is, I mean, and I'm imagining, Chad, and forgive me for putting words in your mouth, but in a beast like Mozilla that has a lot of different things going on, because there's so many different things going on, but it is under the same umbrella, there's more of a possibility that you can do that sort of measurement. Whereas if you're just doing something that is for a network, say, of particular practitioners, and I'm thinking now of like Ashley, you working with digital security people, right? So, in a similar sort of way, an indicator of success might be is if somebody you're working with is working also then within a number of different networks, completely impossible, or projects, right, that are unrelated to what Internews is doing. That's a measure of success, but how do you actually measure that, right? So pulling that over, unless there's anything else from your guys's group, to go over to Ashley and hear a little bit from your guys's group in terms of what indicators of success you came up with.
Yeah, I think just quickly, I'll highlight two things that I think are more overarching. One coming from Mary that I thought was really impactful, of this framing of all indicators should really be co-developed and co-created with the communities that we're attempting to impact. It sounds very basic, but just the framing that she offered of even how you're soliciting that feedback can be powerful. She referenced, you might be submitting surveys, but no one is, your community doesn't respond well to surveys, or they don't appreciate that form of feedback collection. And so just being open and having those dialogues with the community. And the other framing point that came from Internews' own experience was, Dirk, as you mentioned, oftentimes we're working with digital security trainers or organizational security auditors. And so in the past, we've had them on pretty short contracts where we're hiring them to do the training, to do the audit. But then it's really difficult for us to figure out long-term, did that audit actually have an impact on the organization or the community that participated in the training? And so we are working to try and extend those contracts so that we can build in time for long-term impact measurement, as well as just some of the more basic indicators. I think from the indicator perspective, we talked about a lot of the things that were already mentioned, but we also talked about trying to capture unique contributors, particularly for community developed resources. So for example, our SafeTag resource is hosted on GitHub, so it's fairly easy to track there the number of unique contributors. But for our UX feedback collection guidebook, it's a bit more difficult to track who has contributed to that, because it was over a series of in-person convenings. But I still think it's possible to track, the number of specific representatives from specific communities. For example, X number of digital security trainers, participated in the development of this resource. I think that those are really powerful metrics that add to the reputation and the quality of the resource at the end of the day, because it really is developed by trainers for trainers. And then the other thing that we talked about, and Liz, this gets slightly at something you were talking about earlier, around measuring impact in a qualitative sense. Internews has also been fortunate that we can do evaluations, both at the midterm point of our projects as well as the end of our projects. And so that's in addition to the quantitative metrics that we're collecting throughout the life of the project. But these are essentially a series of interviews, surveys, et cetera, with community members that allow us to capture those quotes, that allow us to capture larger stories. And we're actually now in the process of publishing 3 impact stories from our usability and accessibility work, which again is really exciting to help us kind of build out the robustness of these resources in these communities, but also just to raise awareness about the different challenges that folks are facing. I believe those were all the things I had in my notes, but Mary, Neil, I don't know if you have anything to add or edit.
I'll add a question for the room. When you're saying measuring success, does that mean the same thing for everyone? What does that mean? That's obviously a rhetorical question, which might be a reason why it's a hard question to answer, because it might mean different things for people. And also, do you have pre-existing theories of change of the different kind of things that need to happen in order to achieve that success, whatever it might be? Because that can actually be a great skeleton upon which to develop indicators. So if you have that, even if it's qualitative, that's actually the first step that we use at Do Be Good to develop metrics is, what are you actually trying to achieve? What does it look like? Can it be counted, right? So you may actually already have some of the work done for developing metrics if you have that kind of strategic diagram somewhere in your organization.
But I think that thing in terms of the overarching, I mean, it is, you know, we should be very much focused on either strategic frameworks or goals, or, you know what I mean? Like, what is it that we are actually trying to do in the long term, and have that understanding of like, so how does this move us forward? And I know that, you know, that for everybody here, that is completely relevant. Everybody's got like, you know, working under bigger umbrellas of things that they are trying to achieve. I think the thing, you know, getting down though to resources, right, and thinking about them as knowledge assets that are valuable to communities and networks. This frame, and it's funny, I when I first started thinking about this project, I was thinking of this as this is what a network-centric resource is. It is something that shares ownership, enables contribution, and supports collaboration, right? And so for me, you know, in trying to think about how do you, so even in terms of this network itself, and trying to think in terms of like, so, you know, I've put a link in here, but the life cycle for network-centric resources. Many of you here had given me lots of input in terms of that resources. The input that you gave me is actually my only indicator in terms of you know, whether or not it's been successful, or of success, because A, I've shared ownership, and B, I've enabled you to contribute. But what I don't know about is, you know, has it supported collaboration? So meaning like, is it supporting your work beyond this network? Is it supporting the things you're, and I have no idea. Given the fact that this is, you know what I mean? Like I don't have a funder for this project. So the only way that I know is if I'm going to go and ask. Now, Liz Monk at the beginning of this was talking about, you know, the value of having an external evaluator, and being able to go out and ask questions of people that you might not have the opportunity to, but also being able to do it under a different frame that might also lead you to more of these stories about how things get used that you otherwise wouldn't know. And that, knowing after many other, you know, projects that I've worked on where we did have an external evaluator, and we were totally like, oh, wow, really? That, you know, people are using it like that, and totally unexpected. So I'm just trying to think of yeah, just, I mean, toolkits where we were putting stuff out. Oh, toolkits about using mobile phones in campaignings, and then hearing about like how they were using mobile phones to actually get information out to people during crises, and they'd use the toolkit in a variety of different ways that was completely unrelated to what it was actually meant for, right? So there's lots of stuff like you put something out in the world, but it's really hard to get that evolution. So just before I let you go, after having riffed on that, just, does anybody have any ideas in terms of how we do that sort of more bigger meta level, you know what I mean? Like capturing the impact that we might actually be having, but can't get via these numbers or these top level things, or these, not top level, but you know what I mean? The very close to us kind of things. Getting the far afield things about how to track unintended but good uses of things. Oh, I'm thinking Greg's leaving, but he's rearranging stuff.
Maybe I can jump in there, Neil, because sorry, Dirk, because Neil just mentioned the Bay Area gathering of nonprofit tech folks, and where he might share, I think he says, share what we are learning here. And I also am thinking about taking this back to my group of trainers in Amnesty International, and saying something about how what we've learned here could be directly applied to what we do. We have a resource. We are not do well on the sharing ownership and collaboration piece, and we could do better. And I would say that for you, an indicator of success will be that if I get any reply whatsoever from these folks that says, I'm willing to try this out, Hillary. I'm willing to do something for 6 weeks that will show that we have resources that we can use. I would call that a huge success. My entire group is a group of volunteers, very much distracted by other priorities in Amnesty International. So even if I achieve their attention and their commitment to do one small thing, I will consider that a huge success as a direct result of today's experience. I'll take small steps.
Thank you, Hillary. And yeah, and I think that's the thing we all have to keep thinking about, is small steps too, and long-term, right? So we're not going to actually have this understanding of what the impacts are in something if we're doing it really quickly. You have to have that long-term engagement. So really appreciate that, Hillary. Thank you, and would love to hear if you do take it forward. So please, and probably in another call. So I hope you will return for another discussion to do more on that. I love the fact that Greg is brushing his teeth in the frame. Anyways, any other thoughts? We are 3 minutes to the hour, so would love to just get any other thoughts about, and particularly my quandary. How do I know that it's being successful with what you guys are doing? Fair enough. I think there's enough here for a blog post. But one thing I wanted to just do a quick round of is, would also love to have a good list of resources of things to share. I have put in the document, there's a thing on relevant links. So as the day that I announced that we were going to have this discussion, MobLab put out their report on measuring people power. It's super good stuff. And I think this thing of like, how we are evolving past quantitative and going into qualitative, and also knowing that the quantitative is only going to tell us so much, really well highlighted in that report. So I urge everyone to read it. Also, MobLab was great. So I always say pay attention to them. And then also, let's see, Chad, do you want to say something about the resource you threw in there?
Chad left.
Oh, Chad left. Mary, before people go, I know you had something that you wanted to share. A report, something that you put out recently.
Oh yeah, I collected some civic tech impact metrics for a project. I'm not sure how useful those will be, but I will put them in. And I also have an impact cascade, which is a diagram for identifying the steps, the impact steps. So
yeah, please put that in there. Totally appreciate that. And anything else. So if you guys want to share anything else under this guy's please put it in the Google Doc. As I said, I will be sending out a draft blog post. It will be in this document. So anytime if you're thinking of something, please feel free to pop back into this doc and put it in. But I will send an email around to everyone that participated to get a review of the draft blog post before I actually publish it. Want to just say thank you so much, Liz, Ashley. Really appreciate that you all led those small groups, and yeah, thank you. And the rest of you for participating. Really grateful you showed up today and contributed, and hopefully look forward to seeing you in future discussions, and also getting your contributions to the blog post and all that. So thank you very much, and look forward to seeing more of you soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank
Thank you, Dirk. Bye-bye.
Bye.